Thank you, Wolfgang, and it's really great to be back here at the Munich Security Conference, a very important platform for dialogue, especially in times when we see high tensions and many challenges as we see now. And in the report for this conference, you have warned us all that we are moving towards the brink of significant conflict. And my main message today is that it is our common responsibility to enable us to move away from that brink and to prevent conflict. And in my introductory remarks, I will address three issues which are key if we are to achieve exactly that. The Transatlantic Partnership, EU efforts on defense, and nuclear challenges. First, some words about the Transatlantic Partnership. In front of the new NATO headquarters, there are two memorials. One is a section of the Berlin Wall, and the other a twisted girder from the wreckage of the Twin Towers in New York. And together they symbolize NATO's steel-hard commitment to our collective defense and our solidarity in the fight against terrorism. But most of all, they symbolize the unbreakable bond that unites the continents of North America and Europe. During the Cold War, NATO successfully deterred the Soviet Union. When the Cold War ended, we extended a hand of friendship to former adversaries and welcomed them into the Euro-Atlantic family. NATO helped to end two wars in the Balkans, and we remain in Afghanistan to ensure it never again becomes a safe haven for international terrorists. Without the enduring power of the Transatlantic Partnership, none of this would have been possible. But the paradox is that throughout our history, people have questioned the Transatlantic Partnership. From the Suez Crisis to the Iraq War, from America's pivot to Asia, to perceived lack of support for Article 5 and unfair burden sharing, all of this has fueled an impression of weakening transatlantic bond. But the reality is that the bond has proven to be resilient because both Europe and North America benefit from the bond. What we see now is North Americans coming back to Europe, just as Europeans are stepping up their contributions to our shared security. Not just in words, but also in deeds. After the end of the Cold War, the United States reduced its military presence in Europe. In autumn 2013, the last American battle tank left Europe. Now the Americans are back with a new armored brigade. And this week, Washington rolled out a plan for further substantial increases in US presence in Europe. Billions for equipment, pre-positioned supplies, training and infrastructure. Canadian troops have also returned to Europe for the first time in a generation, leading a multinational battle group in Latvia. But the Transatlantic Partnership is not a one-way street. European allies and Canada have stood with America in the fight against terrorism for the better part of 2 decades, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Syria. European allies are also sharing the financial burden of our security. For years, defense spending by European allies and Canada was in decline. But in 2014, facing a changed security environment, all allies made a commitment to reverse that trend. We promised to stop the cuts, and the cuts have stopped. We promised to start increasing defense spending, and defense spending across Europe and Canada has increased for 3 consecutive years for the first time in many years. We promised to move towards spending 2% of GDP on defense within a decade, and we are moving. Remember that in 2014, only 3 allies met the 2% guideline. This year, we expect 8 allies, and by 2024, we expect at least 15. All NATO allies have put forward plans to increase spending in real terms. This is major progress, and it is a very good start. But we still have a long way to go and hard work ahead. The simple message is the Transatlantic Alliance remains the most powerful, most effective, and most reliable alliance the world has ever seen. Because in times of need, we are all prepared to do what is necessary for our shared security. Let me turn to EU's efforts on defense, which I know will be one of the main topics discussed during this conference. I welcome EU efforts on defense. They are an opportunity to further strengthen the European pillar within NATO and contribute to better burden sharing. But with opportunity comes risk. The risk of weakening the transatlantic bond, the risk of duplicating what NATO is already doing, and the risk of discriminating against non-EU members of the NATO alliance. These risks must be avoided. The reality is the European Union cannot protect Europe by itself. European leaders themselves have underlined this point many times. NATO countries outside the EU play a fundamental role in the defense of Europe. After Brexit, 80% of NATO's defense spending will come from non-EU allies. However, this is not only about money, it is also about geography. It is hard to imagine European security without the close involvement of Norway in the north, Turkey in the south, and the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom in the west. But if we remove the risks and make the most out of the opportunities, if the EU actions complement NATO and are not seen as an alternative, then I see great potential for improving European security. That is why a closer NATO-EU cooperation is vital. NATO and EU are natural partners. We share the same values, the same challenges, the same people. More than 90% of the people living in EU countries live in a NATO country. I am proud that over the past couple of years we have made unprecedented progress on NATO-EU cooperation. Today we are working side by side in the Aegean and Mediterranean, in Afghanistan and Iraq, in Georgia, Ukraine and the Western Balkans, and on exercises, cyber and hybrid threats. EU defense can strengthen NATO and keep Europe safe if they are anchored within the transatlantic partnership. Then, before I close, let me say a few words about the re-emergence of nuclear challenges. For many years, the nuclear threat receded from view. Unfortunately, it is back on our agenda, and it would be irresponsible to ignore it. Proliferation is happening now, today, and cornerstone nuclear agreements are under threat, including the INF Treaty. I belong to a political generation for whom debates on nuclear forces in Europe in the 1970s and the 1980s defined our understanding of security issues. The deployment of SS-20, Pershing, and cruise missiles was a profound concern for publics and politicians alike. In 1987, the INF Treaty banned all these weapons. Since then, it has been a pillar for European security. The problem is that the US has determined that Russia is in violation of the INF Treaty by developing and flight testing a new intermediate-range ground-launch cruise missile. We must protect the INF Treaty, and we call on Russia to address the concerns of all NATO allies in a substantial, transparent, and verifiable way. We see that Russia is modernizing its nuclear capabilities, developing new nuclear systems, and increasing the role of nuclear weapons in its military strategy. This is a cause for real concern. At the same time, North Korea continues to develop its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, which pose a threat to us all. All allies are now within range of North Korean missiles. Pyongyang is closer to Munich than it is to Washington, D.C. And therefore, we must put maximum pressure on North Korea to abandon its nuclear program by political and diplomatic means, and not least through effective economic sanctions. Russia and China have a special responsibility as members of the UN Security Council and as neighbors of North Korea. Iran also possesses a proliferation concern. That is why NATO allies place great importance on the Iran nuclear deal. But to be effective, it must be properly implemented. All these developments forces us to pay more attention to nuclear threats. And let me be clear. NATO's goal is a world without nuclear weapons. But as long as they exist, NATO will remain a nuclear alliance. A world where Russia, China, and North Korea have nuclear weapons, but NATO does not, is not a safer world. That is why the ultimate guarantee of NATO's security is the strategic nuclear forces of allies, particularly those of the United States. We need to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. At the same time, allies remain committed to reducing the number of nuclear weapons in a balanced and verifiable way. And we have a strong track record. Since the height of the Cold War, NATO allies have reduced their nuclear arsenal in Europe by 90%. In its recent nuclear post-review, the US reconfirmed its commitment to nuclear arms control and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
and the United States has also reiterated its global leadership role in reducing the number of nuclear weapons. Only last week, Washington and Moscow announced that the limits of the new START treaty have been reached, restricting the United States and Russia to 1,550 deployed warheads each, down from 12,000 in 1994 when the first START treaty came into force. That shows the importance of such landmark agreements. It shows that arms control can work, and it shows that the risk of conflict can be effectively reduced. Ladies and gentlemen, our world may have become more dangerous, but conflict is not inevitable. To preserve the peace, we need the military strength of the NATO alliance, combined with the political courage to seek dialogue, to de-escalate, reduce tensions, and find peaceful solutions to our differences. Then we move away from the brink of conflict. Thank you.